So what's fairly clear from that first video is that the church thinks reform is needed. And as you saw in the video you just watched, the church then did undertake some reform. So let's start there. The church, which may have not at the beginning of the 1500s said, yeah, we need to reform. The church would have said things are going great. But you start to get enough of those customer review slips, and people start to say, the church starts to say, well, maybe we're not doing that great of a job. Now again, it's not as bad as Luther said. Luther's completely nuts. He's made up things. It's crazy. But maybe we could, do it a little bit better than we have. So okay, reform is needed. The important thing that the church is then going to say is, look, this is not a democracy. The church is not a democracy. The God speaks to the world through the church. So it's not like everybody in the church gets a say, every person in the world gets a say in this thing. The church, headed up by the Pope, that's how things are done. And so if we're going to do reform, we're going to do it from the center out. We're not going to let, everybody just go off on their own thing. Everybody starts doing their own reform thing, it's a problem. And you actually see this with the Christian mystics. For every Teresa of Avila that the church embraces and says, we think that you're doing a good job, there's 50 other people who say, I was touched by God too, and God said this. And the church says, you're crazy. You're a heretic, and get out of here. So the church is going to be sort of the ultimate arbiter of what reform is needed and how to achieve it. So the church wants to make sure that happens before the church splits. Now we do know the church does eventually split because of the Reformation, but maybe we could even say, can we keep it from splitting? Can we keep those before the Protestants become their own thing? And now we know there's Protestantism and Catholicism. There's this belief definitely in this time period that if the church just kind of cleans up its act, it's going to draw a lot of those people that broke away from the church back, and then Protestantism will die away because, it'll just be easier to come back to the church, and so there won't be a split at all. All right, so if you're the church, you say, okay, the first thing we got to do is we got to get a little control over this situation. It's a little chaotic right now. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing. You got Franciscans over there doing their thing. You got these guys over here. We got to get this under control. So the first thing they do is they bring back the Inquisition, right? You got to have somebody out there saying, okay, heresy, not heresy, heresy, burn at the stake, heresy, not, that kind of thing. So we're going to bring back the Inquisition, and they're going to be out there sort of checking things out. Then they're going to put in place what's called the Index. It's going to censor heretical writings. First and foremost on the list is going to obviously be Luther. But there's going to be others, Again, there's some obvious ones like the Protestants that are going to be on the Index. It's heretical writings. You can't publish them. If you publish them, you're going to hell. That kind of thing. But then there's also going to be Catholics who say, and this is what the church should do. And if the church isn't going to do that, then that has to be a heretical writing, and you have to sort of write it off. And so, again, it's trying to get control over the people, the ideas. Okay, so far so good. Now, how are you going to do this? You kind of need foot soldiers out there doing it, and the Pope has it right in hand. The Pope's going to put these Jesuits to work in places to solidify and expand Catholic influence, because this is great. This will, kind of catch some of the bad guys, but this is not a very good thing if there's more heretics being born all the time. We can't keep up. We don't have enough, things to burn people with. This is great, but it's not going to work completely. You can censor writings in Catholic areas, but those writings will still exist and they'll be hidden and all that. What you need to sort of push back on these negative influences from the church's perspective, and the Jesuits can do that. They can sort of solidify things at home and go out abroad. So it's going to be things like fighting heresy, especially Protestantism in Europe. They're going to be sent to, not only they're going to be in places like Italy and Catholic places, but they're going to be sent to England. They're going to be sent to Germany. They're going to be sent all over the place to try and fight against this heresy. Another big role they're going to play as now Europe is going out there and quote unquote discovering the rest of the world, particularly the Americas. Now there's all these people over there. There's not just Europeans over there who are going to need help to make sure that they don't go astray, being so far away from the center of the church, but there's also new people in the Americas that need to be Christianized. And so converting the heathen and the infidels globally, especially in the New World, the Jesuits are going to be one of the leading forces in this as well. And then training the next generation of Christians. The Jesuits are going to be very well known for the colleges that they set up during this time period. And for the next 100 to 200 years, the Jesuit colleges are going to be the best institutions of higher learning in the Catholic world. And that's going to be the case. And even today, I mean, you still see a number of Jesuits who are university instructors. It's a very common thing. And then one more thing that's going to help is going to be the Council of Trent. There needs to be like sort of an official church statement as to what's in, what's out. And more importantly, the Council of Trent also serves as sort of a, okay, we've finished reforming. We're done. Stop talking about it. It's fixed. Let's move on. You can't be reforming all the time. Now, you'll note how long this is, and we'll talk about why it's so long here in just a second. So it goes almost 20 years. There is lots of politics wrapped up in the spiritual debates at the Council of Trent. So again, they're going for about 18 years. Now, it turns out they didn't actually meet for about 18 years. They met for a couple of years, took a long break, and they would then meet again sort of periodically. And there's a reason that happened like that. Like, for example, at the very beginning, there was this question of, okay, we're going to have a council, right? Where are we going to hold it? Where will it be held, and who gets invited? Who gets to vote at this council? Because remember, the church is a huge operation. There are Catholics in France. There's Catholics in Eastern Europe. There's Catholics in Italy. There's Catholics all over the place. Where are you going to hold this thing? If France and the Holy Roman Empire are fighting over control of Italy, if it's held in the Holy Roman Empire, France isn't going to want to go. If it's held in France, the Holy Roman Empire is not going to go. If it's held in Italy, it's just going to be a big war zone. So they decided to hold it in Trent, which is kind of in the Holy Roman Empire, but it was in kind of a sketchier part. I know that sounds weird for me to say that. It wasn't as firmly within the Holy Roman Empire. It felt like a neutral ground. The problem is that almost immediately, all three of these powers, the French, the Holy Roman Empire, and the papacy, are all at war at this point with each other. And occasionally the war would drift into Trent. And so they would have to cancel the council and head home. And so that made it take, a council that may have taken 2 or 3 years, took 20 years to complete. What did they actually do at the council? By the time they finally got their act together, they finally got this figured out. What the 1560s, in the early 1560s, they kind of got this settled, and they said, okay, let's get this over with. When it began, the first thing they did is they said, look, we're here for reform, but Luther is jacked up. And more importantly, for a lot, there was this conversation as to whether the Council of Trent would be a thing that would find a compromise with the Protestants so that the split between the two could be healed and the Protestants could be back in the church. And the first thing they did is the people at the Council of Trent said, nope, we're not going to do that. That's a heresy. It's got to go. We're going to do some reforms. Don't get me wrong. But that's crazy. And so you guys are not sort of like people we're going to compromise with. You're heretics. So repent and come back. That's fine. But otherwise, you guys are out. The guiding idea behind the Council of Trent is if we fix the church's abuses, then the Protestants will return to the church. Now, again, it just sounded like I said the opposite of that. Who they were aiming at was not people like Martin Luther or the leaders of the Protestants. They were aiming at the average person. They were saying, look, we're gonna fix the problems that you think we have. So you don't have to go the Luther radical way. You can just come on back to the church. It's totally fine. And this is the main ideas here. 1, all clergy must be trained in theology at seminaries. It seems odd, but priests weren't necessarily trained in theology. They were just priests. And so, I'm in this local church somewhere far away from Rome. I may not always stick very closely to the Catholic doctrines. And so that leads to all these sort of splits in doctrinal. So so again, the idea here being that if they're all trained in theology at seminaries, they'll all be trained centrally in one doctrine. All the bishops have to actually live in their bishopric. Becoming a bishop was not because I was this great spiritual leader. Being a bishop actually, it means I'm in control of this piece of property, a large, a bishop was like a prince in a way. And so I got all the money from the rents and all that from that. So like I wasn't so concerned about living in that area. I was more concerned about taking my money from that area. And that just didn't feel very bishopy. And so the church said, look, if you're going to be a bishop, you got to live in the bishopric. You got to be a part of the whole thing. All right. Great. And then reaffirm the centrality of the Pope and the institutional church. Like at the end of the day, who gets to say something's in, something's out, something's heresy, something's not heresy? It's the Pope through the institutional church. Nobody else gets the right to say it. So if Luther says, man, I think that's heresy, the Pope says no, Pope wins. That's the idea here. And the Pope does take on a new sort of, the church is sort of, I'm not even going to say it. Let's just say that the Pope becomes a much more important figure for a little while. Not for a long time though, but for the next 50, 60 years, the Pope takes on sort of a new centrality. All right. Great. So we've got the church has done some reforms. This doesn't feel like much, and it feels very sort of, when it says reform, what it means is that the church didn't do anything wrong. It was bad priests that did stuff wrong. So the church gets the priests back under control, and everything will be fine. That sort of is a summing up of that. Now, what then happens as a result of all this stuff we talked about? How did this impact art? And we're going to talk about